Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DCN JOC election night broadcast. That was Chris Atchison, head of the British Columbia Construction Association, in that feature interview. And just before we dive into some of the issues that maybe Chris spoke of that our team can give you a bit more context to and perspective, figured we do a check-in because as we start to move across Canada slowly but surely, the numbers are changing. And it was just about 40 minutes ago when we first reported to you how the parties were faring as far as election and leading. And quite a bit has changed as far as numbers because we're starting to get a bit more reporting. We're still sitting at about 7.1% of polls reporting, but the Liberals right now are elected or leading in 66 ridings. You have the Conservatives second at 34, the NDP at 10. Of course, now because the Quebec numbers have started to come in, and this is going to be a major player right now in how the rest of maybe things are going to play out as we get through in Ontario into the west. The BQ, the Bloc Québécois, is sitting with 7. And you have the Greens actually holding firm, either elected or leading in 1. When you look at the percentage or the share of the voting, Liberals still sitting at 42%, Conservatives at 32%, NDP at 16.9%, the PPC, People's Party of Canada, at 4.5, and the Greens are starting to kind of pick up a little bit from when we last checked in, and they're sitting at 3% of the vote, and the Bloc Québécois at 1% of the vote. But their 1% is resulting in that leading or elected in 7 seats. So is that maybe a harbinger of how Quebec is going to go in general? We'll see. But we were talking BC and we're talking Chris Atchison, so I'm throwing it out to the team. What do we want to explore in what we just heard in that feature interview?
Yeah, I mean, you could probably lump community benefits agreements into like a larger kind of broader movement around what you would call social procurement. So not just doing procurement to be like, we need someone to do this for us. So let's set up a process, who can do it for the best price, who's most experienced, yada yada yada. The province of BC, which is led by the provincial NDP, which is very union friendly, is saying we want to use procurement to accomplish certain goals. With Indigenous participation, apprenticeship training goals, underrepresented groups, things like that. So they're saying like we don't just want this to be a process by which we pick someone to do work. We want it to be a process by which we provide solutions to some of the problems. Like, if we need more workers, they mandate that you have apprentices on the site. And I think the way that it's pitched, which is like, if you go and ask somebody, do you want more Indigenous people, more women, more underrepresented groups, more apprentices in the industry? People would say yes. But I think where there's a lot of disagreement in the province is how they're going about doing that. And, like Warren said, some of the open shop people say it's not fair that we can't maybe access the workforce that we want to do these jobs. And I think this raises kind of a broader issue, not issue, but the broader concept of social procurement, which I've actually been reporting on a lot recently, because Indigenous participation is a huge thing. And to be frank, it's a selfish thing for the construction industry. They need the labor. Obviously it's the right thing to do, but it's also the practical thing to do. How you have workforces that live near where some of these projects are. And I was talking to someone who specializes in this, and they say that a lot of people react, some people react really negatively when there's priority given to Indigenous companies or workers in the procurement process. And, he's quick to point out several things. First of all, Indigenous participation was not a thing years ago. They were economically kept out of a lot of things. They haven't been allowed to accrue the same assets and capabilities of larger companies who've reaped the benefits from government policies. Also, just breaking it down even to like a lower level of just boots on the ground workers. Everybody says we want more, Indigenous people in construction, but the problem is they haven't had the same investment from the government in education, and that's not their fault. And so often you get people who say, I want to be involved in the construction sector, but they haven't had access to the same educational resources as the rest of Canada. And there needs to be effort. A lot of people would say there needs to be effort to rectify that. So it's just kind of righting some of the past's wrongs is seems to be some growing pain in parts of the industry that's happening right now from the people that I've been chatting with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just to tack on to what you're saying, Russ, I do think to point something out. Sometimes it can be construed that the open shop people are not necessarily for the concept of CBAs, but they actually are. Some of them making some inroads with their own training opportunities as well. So I just did want to point that out. There has been some efforts made there, so they do feel in some cases they're being unfairly represented. But when it comes to the Indigenous component to things, I've been actually optimistic in of late in terms of some of the initiatives that have been going on within the industry. For example, you just did a great story on a Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
I guess, a group that is solely Indigenous contractors, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you want to elaborate at all on that, but
so it's a
yeah.
group of Indigenous, majority Indigenous-owned companies, and their whole goal is to advocate for and educate the industry at large about some of the challenges that Indigenous companies have faced historically. Because again, they'll go to people and say, Indigenous procurement and providing more opportunities and a leg up for Indigenous companies. And then people will react negatively and go, "Oh, that's not fair. We should all compete on the same level." And they'll explain kind of the history of economic abuse that has happened in the Indigenous community that prevented them from participating in the past. And it's just it's a matter of getting them back to the level where they need to be. And so there's a group that's getting together, and their main thing is education around Indigenous procurement, and also they also mentioned that a big part of recent history with Indigenous companies is they've been pitted against each other and competing with each other, and they haven't really historically worked together well in the past. And so this is also a great way for them to kind of be more united in their advocacy efforts. So that's really interesting to see, and I'm definitely curious to see what's going to happen with that group.
I mean, I think we can categorically say, and we've heard Jack Meat say this on the campaign trail a few times, and I know you all personally, as far as a team, and I know we're all on the same page with this. It is, quite frankly, it's disgusting. In a country that is well developed and as well capitalized as Canada is, resource rich, water rich, the state of affairs on the reservations, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of regular social, you know what I mean, tools that they have, you know what I mean, and infrastructure
just clean water.
Just clean water. Like, I mean, it's so basic. The fact that, yes, the Liberals have been working their way through those boil water advisories as part of the reconciliation kind of mandate of a lot of different things, and I'm not here to advocate for the Liberals, but quite frankly, you know what I mean? At least we've seen some movement on some files. Not enough. They failed in some areas as well, but talking just in the world that we cover, as far as construction, we've seen some movement, and we're starting to see a bit more stuff through the reporting that we're doing. We're starting to see that traction happening. So much more can be done. And when we talk about partnerships, and I think about how strong this industry is that we cover nationally, coast to coast, is why more doesn't happen is frustrating. Because we see this industry mobilize on so many different fronts at times, but there seems to still be a bit of a disconnect. You know what I mean? We have this need here in Canada to really connect, you know what I mean, this industry to help raise up, you know what I mean? Or to just help give the opportunity for them to raise up, you know what I mean? And create more of these companies, you know what I mean? And do the training and just improve the state of affairs on these reserves. You know what I mean? To help people. Like, it shouldn't be this way here. I know it's kind of like a Pollyanna thing, but it's the truth, right?
Well,
yeah, like I think it's pretty sad that we just had the other day a news brief online celebrating the opening or the a water treatment plant in Shoal Lake, which was a place in northern Ontario near Manitoba border. Basically, they've been under a boil water advisory for eons, finally get a road that they wanted in, and then there's this big celebratory thing at the end. These are basic human rights that
Embarrassing.
we should not be like, yay, this finally happened after this many years. That's, as Vince said, it's disgusting.
Part of it is, I think, a matter of communication. First Nations point, there's a matter of trust. I've got a quote from Jagmeet Singh here. So when the Liberals are taking kids to court, that just looks bad. You can stop 109 boil water advisories. A bunch of others pop up. You can say we're going to commit $6 billion to that. We're going to stop it. And the next term they keep on extending the goalposts. But during the debate, Singh has said, how do you restore trust when Indigenous communities suffering injustice continues and it's still broken today? How do you restore trust when you've got a prime minister who one day, says he makes promises one day and takes Indigenous kids to court the next day? How do you restore trust in a company as wealthy as ours, G7 nation in the 21st century? So to the point you're making, Vince, it just seems hard to believe, and then, Singh was in near Rainy River, northwestern Ontario anyway. And making that point, one has to say when it's a question of will, you have to start to question it when we haven't fulfilled our promises after 6 years.
I'll give you a specific example real quick. Is you have Indigenous youth right now who say, I want to be involved in the trades. And of course, the industry's like, yes, that's what we want. I don't think any of us have talked to a single source that would say, I do not want Indigenous people participating in construction. The problem is you have some people coming from communities that have been historically neglected with education. And so they don't have the math or reading or whatever skills. So then they go to take the test to try and get involved in the trades through the unions or whatever, and they can't do it. And that gap needs to be bridged. It's not their fault that their communities were neglected, right? And those people want to participate, and there's a barrier for them. And I think more probably needs to be done to bridge that.
Look, we're all proud. And it doesn't matter what prime minister we've had in the past in our lifetimes. We like to tout our foreign affairs kind of portfolio and Canada, the big heart, Canada, the peacekeepers. Look how, you know what I mean? We do this, we do that around the world. But quite frankly, folks, we got to be hard on ourselves, and we got to hold, and it's our job too, as media, to hold these people to account, right? It's like, why can't we get this right in our own house? And the extrapolated argument is it's not really our house, quote unquote. We took it from them. We came here, and look at what we left them with, right? Like Russ, I listened to what you're saying, and I remember reporting on it as well. It's like the fact that the basic education isn't provided to them, or the ability to give them the opportunity to learn and to be better equipped so they can take those tests and enter the trades is unacceptable. You know what I mean? And I would love this industry to really step up, at some point, and really take the bull by the horns, you know what I mean, in some area, and just fix it, you know what I mean, as best they can in their part of the world, and set the example, right? And some of the stuff you're reporting on is maybe the early precursor of them taking control of their own destiny to make it better.
I'm looking on the platforms. They're all talking about
climate change. That's another topic, right?
Sorry, yeah, Vince, you kind of are cutting out there a little bit.
Yeah. Just one more on that point. Look at, comparing the platforms again. At least they all understand there's no, that paternalism is not going to work this time around. So there's discussion of like the Liberals are going to co-develop a new Indigenous urban, rural, and northern housing strategy. The Conservatives are saying for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy, and they're going to create a Canadian Indigenous Enterprise Corporation for resource development. The NDP is going to co-develop a national plan for reconciliation. So, at least we're hearing a recognition of, but these things should be co-developed at least.
Yeah, you know what I think is an interesting point that has been raised in a number of articles that I've read by you guys is not only that they haven't been necessarily provided the educational needs to help Indigenous people pursue trades opportunities and whatnot. But conversely to that, they haven't been able to educate our industry about what is important to them when it comes to procurement, design concepts. They're more than happy to be, I say they, but Indigenous people want to be part of P3s, for example. There's a number of companies out there that are some involved in P3s, but some that would like to be. But there is a totally different way of discussing, procurement, be it social procurement, be it the cultural elements to it, that I think this industry needs to be a little bit more, have a bit more of a willingness to hear about that. It's not always there. There's an educational component there as well.
Well, I think there's like some hope on like the project side, because a lot of the reporting I've done over the years, it used to be in some cases, you'd have people develop a project, come up with an idea, and once they're done, kind of planning everything, then they'd go take it to a First Nations group and pitch it and try and convince them of this or that, or come up with some sort of agreement. And Indigenous people now are saying, don't do that. We want to be involved from the start. Like before you go and make all your plans, please talk to us. We want to be involved in the process. And I think I'm starting to see more of that happen, where before all the plans are set in stone, before all the contracts and everything, the ink is dried. Like before all that's happened, they're going to Indigenous people and they're saying, okay, let's work on this together as partners, as equals, rather than trying to get your approval after the fact, right? Which I think that's encouraging to see in some cases. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I think with, kind of tacking on to that, it's not necessarily the, before Vince cut out there, he also alluded to some things on the climate change front, which I think we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss that with regards to the industry. So when it comes to climate change, it's been a hot topic among the party platforms. There's been a number of areas and promises made. Again, we discussed the greening up, if you will, certain skills sectors and whatnot. But what's been your overall take on the pledges made by the parties when it comes to, climate change, be it net zero opportunities, et cetera? What's been what you think have been some highlights? Anyone?
Well, hopefully my audio doesn't cut in and out, but
Yeah, you
let me
sound
know.
good right now,
Yeah.
Vince. You're sounding
okay,
good.
all right. So bear with me, but when we think about that debate, the English language debate, and the discussion when it did come to climate change, right? As disjointed as it was, it could have been a better debate in general. We could discuss that. Everybody wants to talk about these climate, the Paris climate targets, right? You know what I mean? Oh, well, the Liberals have never hit one. The Liberals have never made a target that they've talked about. Oh, they changed their targets. Well, the little thing in the middle of that is, well, they're asked to review their targets and change them as part of the accord, right? It's something that's built into that. A lot still needs to be done. I think there's an argument when they make it against the Liberals of you can't be talking climate change and still be supporting the patch. You know what I mean? Still be supporting oil and pipelines if you really want to address climate change. I think the way we cover this industry, we know it's a bit more of a nuanced debate, nuanced issue. You know what I mean? Trying to transition trades from traditional trades to more green energy jobs. There is work that needs to be done and groundwork around that. Same drum from an hour ago. I think if it's not a pandemic election, I think we're talking a lot more detail. We're talking a lot more about climate change in a way that really wasn't addressed. Like Angela, when you were talking to like the Ontario folks, did that stuff come up around climate change at all? Like, or some of your interviews that you've done in the past on this side? Like, it doesn't feel like it has as much traction here on this end of Canada as it does in the West, but I could be wrong.
No, they didn't touch on climate change at all, which I thought was interesting. The main focus was definitely they were concerned about the pandemic and how to get out of it basically, or to recover from it, the economic recovery. And like I mentioned before, the pipeline of projects coming through and spending infrastructure dollars faster and getting things built faster. There was no talk about even of the other kind of pipelines at all on my end in Ontario anyways. I'm not sure how it was out west.
You know, it's
Well, what do you
interesting too, to talk climate change also means to talk energy efficiency and building retrofits and conversions of things and whatnot. That is highlighted in a couple platforms with regards to, again, going back to housing. It's lumped into that, but it does play a role on reducing, impacts on climate change. So it's kind of interesting to see this spin that sometimes gets put on some of this stuff. I know I've seen it in a lot of more of the recent articles we've done on innovation in the industry when it comes to retrofits and whatnot, but I'm not sure on where things sit necessarily out west there, Russ.
Well, I'll give you a really specific example. I mean, on the coast, we're already feeling the effects of climate change severely. I mean, look at the Lytton.
Yeah.
Every single year we're getting horrific wildfires, and just recently an entire town was wiped off the face of the earth. It was the hottest temperature I think ever recorded in Canada, and that place is gone. And now that they're looking at rebuilding it, they're learning lessons. They're going, well, we want to rebuild this place. How do we rebuild it? And we're talking net zero. We're talking renewable energy. We're talking all sorts of things. And I think that's like a microcosm of what's happening in BC at large, where Vancouver and in other cities are really aggressively trying to get to net zero with new buildings and doing retrofits and things like that. And yeah, we're already seeing places destroyed because of climate change in BC, and people are coughing on the wildfire smoke and traveling right now. I think recently, like, a bunch of roads were closed because of the heavy rains after the wildfires, and because of mudslide warnings. So like our daily lives in BC are already being impacted by severe weather. And so I think it's pretty urgent here. And I think that's part of why you have really, I mean, that's part of, there's more reasons why, but that's part of why I think there's really strong activism circles in BC opposing things like oil, LNG, Trans Mountain expansion, things like that. Because you look out your window and you see clouds of smoke, and that's just something that we're living with right now.
We had a recent article in our building, one of our recent features by Gene Sorensen, our correspondent, and it was about how there is the technology and there is the building products and the materials to build better, to build smarter. And all these wildfires and these early effects of climate change, people want to deny it. The science is there, but we can talk about arguing science versus what people believe in on a couple of different topics. That's not for this live stream.
Sure.
It can happen. You can build better. You can build smarter in response to climate change and also to improve the climate. But do you want to invest in the cost? How do you incentivize the actual companies that are building, let alone the consumers?
Mm-hmm.
I know from a personal point of view right now, like, I mean, with our family, we're trying to go a bit greener with the power source into our home. We're looking at geothermal. There is a grant program that's run by the feds. I can tell you categorically that program is a mess. And us trying to get an audit done, you know what I mean? So we can qualify for some of those rebates and whatnot. It's a joke. You know what I mean? That great idea, the concept of the idea is great, but preparing the people to execute the program to assist the consumers who are willing to step up, you know what I mean? It's not there. You know what I mean? It just isn't there. And it's like, well, you can't even execute some little thing. And this is a federal program. You know what I mean? How do we address it on a lot more global scale, right?
BC had a
tougher.
similar
In this
thing.
industry, it can benefit. Is that you saw that there too?
Well, they had a similar program that used to encourage people to, especially Indigenous communities that maybe not be as close to, the mainland power grid. And they used to have programs that encouraged developing your own renewable energy. And then they kneecapped it a few years ago and stopped doing it. And so, yeah, it's frustrating. But like you said, I think that's, like you said about the cost, like the technology exists, like carbon capture, things like that exists. They're doing it in Squamish, BC right now. They're building large scale carbon capture facilities, and even geothermal It works. It exists. The problem is that it costs a lot of money up front. It's a money thing. Like geothermal, to go hunting for a geofield, it's a lot of time. It's risky. The private sector looks at that and they say, "Wow, that's cool, but it's a lot of risk. It's a lot of money. No thanks." And so I think government has a role where they can incentivize or de-risk that a little bit, especially with things like geothermal and carbon capture, because we know how to do that. That technology exists. It's just a matter of, somebody stepping up and saying, "I'll help de-risk it," right?
Yeah. I'm looking at the list. I'm looking at the liberal platform again. It's I think they've had a pretty good record incentivizing green building. Now, and so what they, some new items, they'll launch a net zero emissions building strategy, aiming to bring net zero emissions from buildings by 2050 and all that goal. We'll create a low carbon building materials innovation hub, and that's been mentioned on the, over the past while. So then you look at the electoral landscape tonight. What happens? The Conservatives tacked to the center, adopted their personal savings account. What happens if the Knights come out for O'Toole if he fails drastically in this election? Where do they go from here? Well, is this a failed experiment, or might the next leader of the party, if O'Toole doesn't survive, take them further to the right? So, this election will have consequences for the loser anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's kind of ironic, or I don't know, that's probably not the right word, but during the debate, the Conservatives, the NDP, and whatnot took a real hit, made real jabs at Trudeau with regard to the climate stuff, and how he's missed targets and has done basically nothing, and to fight the climate crisis that's currently out there. But I think their platforms don't seem to be that detailed themselves on plans for climate change, just from what I've read. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic that it's such a the term climate change is such a massive, all-encompassing term that it's very difficult to necessarily pinpoint who's going to do a better job at what without really trying to be multifaceted in various components. The construction industry being one of them.
What's the Conservatives' big line that they're doing? They're trying to rebrand as this. It's not your father's party or whatever.
Yes,
right? They're trying to pivot, and I know they've tried to cozy up to unions a bit more, which some of the larger unions were not buying, especially like Unifor was not particularly responsive to that. So yeah, I guess a question is that kind of pivot where they're like, look, we're not what we used to be. We're not your father's, conservative party. Will that work? I'm not, we'll see.
No, I was going to say we got a couple of things lined up for the next little bit in the live stream here. We are going to get to an interview that I did with Mark Romoff, former president and CEO of the Council of Canadian Public-Private Partnerships. With Mark, we talked primarily about infrastructure, P3s, and just the general climate. We also as housing as well, but also just the kind of his hopes for what comes out of this election, what we hope to see for the industry and for Canada in general. But as we've credit to this team here, as we've been kind of rolling along with our election coverage weekly, we had Lindsey, what was it called? Read My Lips? Was that the segment?
Lips. It sure was.
Why don't you describe a bit to the viewers and listeners what that was about? Because we'll have one roll out just after that.
Well, I certainly can't take any credit for the catchy title. That was all Russ. But it is essentially, we thought it would be interesting every Friday to release a slideshow of sorts of the some interesting and headline-making quotes. And this campaign was full of them. So I won't give too much away. I'll let Warren play or read my lips for you, but essentially it gives you some colorful commentary from the party leaders, whether it's taking jabs at, each other or just some overarching highlighting messages. So with that, I'll let Warren take it away.